Bacon smoked above your bed. Chickens slept at your feet. Dinner was cabbage soup and bread as black as mud. Want to know how peasants survived on this for centuries? Here's the part nobody tells you. This bleak diet kept an entire civilization alive. But what exactly did a medieval peasant eat day after day, season after season, and how did anyone survive on it without breaking? Stay with me. By the end of this, you'll never look at a loaf of bread, a bowl of soup, or a pint of beer the same way again. Start with the truth most schools skip. Peasants didn't live in a fantasy of endless roasts and cauldrons of slop. They lived by a clock made of weather, debts, and rules. The year told them what they could eat and when. Winter salted their options, spring starved them, summer worked them, autumn finally paid them. Above that calendar stood the Lord and the Church. One demanded labor, the other demanded obedience, and a tenth of everything you owned, counted in grain, eggs, or coin you didn't have. Picture the tithe barn, a rib cage of timbers, dark as a throat. Your sacks of rye and oats go in, rats and damp take their share. Come sowing time, you borrow seed back from what you already paid, praying the steward isn't in a foul mood. Miss the sowing window and the ground punishes you twice, once now with wasted effort, and again in 6 months with an empty table. Daily fuel came from bread, always bread, and from pottage, a catch-all stew that turned whatever you had into warmth you could swallow. Bread told the world who you were. The finer and whiter, the richer the mouth that ate it. For most, bread meant rye, barley, or oats ground at the Lord's mill for a fee you couldn't dodge. Mix in peas or beans when grain ran low. In a bad year, stretch it with chestnuts or even acorn meal to make horse bread. Edible? Yes. Joyful? Not the point. Pottage was the peasant's answer to everything. Water or ale in a pot, then in went cabbage, leeks, onions, a fist of dried peas, a clutch of herbs, a lucky bone or two. Let it simmer into a thick greenish comfort that could greet you twice a day without complaint. On good days, it tasted like patience. On bad days, it tasted like resignation. Either way, it filled bellies, and that was the victory that mattered. Where's the meat, you ask? In winter, mostly because animals couldn't feed themselves once pasture died, families slaughtered pigs and the cow too old to milk, then turned the whole animal into thyme. Salt and smoke were magic tricks. Fat rendered into lard, bellies into bacon, hams into months. Nothing wasted. Blood into black pudding, intestines into sausage casings, trotters into jelly that shivered on the table and carried a day's grease into thin bodies. Beef showed up when a cow's milk failed or a neighbor had to sell cheap before feed ran out. Nobles loved venison and boar. Peasants loved anything that didn't rot first. If you lived near water, fish saved you. Rivers and ponds pulsed with eels, pike, carp. The sea made saints of mackerel and herring and cod, especially when the church said, no meat. Salted fish was a hard, briny wall you had to gnaw through with vinegar or wine sauce and a handful of thyme or parsley. Stockfish cod beaten dry and salted until it could break. A knife softened after 2 days of soaking and boiled into something your jaw forgave. Lampreys, those toothy tubes, were delicacies for the rich and punishments for the poor, depending on your taste and your wallet. Chronicles say a king died from too many lampreys. Peasants died from too few calories. You can guess which story the village told more often. Did they drink water? Of course, when it was good. Wells, springs, fast streams were blessings. But when a summer turned mean and a river soured, ale stood in for safety. Don't picture a festival pint. Picture small ale, a weak brew that was half food, half drink, and all coping mechanism. It replaced sweat, numbed the backache, and tasted better than ditch water. Children drank it. Elders drank it. Workers drank a stronger brew because swinging a scythe at noon on bread and hope alone is a fast way to collapse. A gallon a day sounds absurd until you remember you're talking about liquid bread. Let's step into one house for 1 year and eat what they eat. It's February. The fire sulks. Outside, the earth is a locked box. The hunger gap has arrived. Last year's stores are thin. This year's green hasn't surfaced. Breakfast is yesterday's pottage made of cabbage, tired of defending your life, a rind of cheese, and bread so coarse it fights your teeth. You take a little bacon from the hook because the child won't stop coughing. You hope the smoke keeps what's left from turning green. Lent begins soon. The rules tighten. Meat, milk, eggs. The church says no, and your body says please. You lace fish with vinegar to convince yourself it's dinner. Now April. Sowing done, you kneel at the garden. The word vegetable doesn't exist yet. You say herbs for everything green. Leeks thrust up like little flags. Cabbages promise their heavy heads. Beans climb, peas climb faster. You stick cuttings of sage and thyme into hopeful soil. A hen finally lays. An egg is not breakfast, it's currency. You barter 2 for a scoop of salt, because without salt, time wins and you lose. June arrives with hands on its hips. Long days, sore backs, better bowls. The garden pays you back. Young carrots, sweet as apologies, onions that bite but forgive when stewed, a fist of parsley that pretends to be spice. You forage under hedges for berries that stain your fingers and make children grin shamelessly. You chew raw things? Not often. Every self-respecting household knows someone who swears raw greens cause sickness. Maybe they said it last year after an uncle got the summer flux. Maybe they read it in a cookbook that told them a raw salad will make the master ill. So you boil and stew and bake and pretend you don't miss the snap of cold fruit. August sets the table and then kicks the legs out from under it. Harvest rules everything. You break your fast on bread and posset hot milk curdled with ale, then cut until your hands belong to the scythe more than to you. Pottage thickens with peas and a miraculous rabbit snared behind the Lord's barns. Don't touch the deer. You have eyes. The forest law has teeth. If you're very lucky, your neighbor knows a warrener, and a rabbit changes hands in the gray area between gift and crime. Autumn finally honors the contract. Grain thumps into the barn. Apples fall like forgiveness. You steep some in water and birth cider by accident and by memory. You scald bottles and promise yourself to save 2 for winter Sundays. Slaughter Day is a grim celebration. Pigs squeal, knives flash, blood steams in the cold. You pack salt in and smoke out, cursing the cost and thanking the result. For a week, the village smells like victory. For 3 months after, you eat like the war isn't always winning. Then, winter again. The circle closes. What about the towns? Different pressures, same hunger. Many rented rooms without hearths, so they bought food from cookshops. Meat pies with a mean ratio of beef to gravy, thick soups, and bread baked in someone else's oven because wood cost more than patience. City pigs roamed, half property, half pest. Fishwives shouted down streets, slick with yesterday. A clerk with ink on his fingers ate better than a porter, but both knew the price of wheat before the bell rang it. Did nobles really eat swans? Sometimes. They also ate what you ate, just finer and fancier. Wheat bread baked white on purpose. Meat scented with spices that arrived on ships and made servants sneeze. And sauces like cameline wine, vinegar, ground bread, cinnamon that turned a slab of salted flesh into an argument about taste. Some cooks roasted a bird and redressed it in its own feathers for spectacle. Hedgehog and pastry appears in books, but often it was meat molded to look like something witty. Status eats with presentation. Hunger eats with a spoon. Spices for peasants? Not usually. But herbs were democratic. Rosemary, sage, thyme, parsley, all cheap if you grew them, pricier if you didn't, priceless when a pot of cabbage needed saving from despair. A sprig could trick a thin stew into supper. Garlic and leeks were love and medicine in the same mouthful. If anyone told you vegetables were for the poor, they were telling you poverty has good taste because it must. Bread mattered so much it became a plate. Trenchers, the thick slices that soaked up juices and turned into second courses, fed either diners or beggars, depending on the hall and the mood. In a peasant house, your trencher is yesterday's crust, shaped by hunger and habit. In a lord's hall, it's 3-day-old brown bread carved into boats for gravy. After the feast, the kitchen decides whether charity or chickens get them. Let's talk rules, because food without rules is a fable. The church drew lines on the calendar and on your plate. Wednesdays and Fridays often meant fasting. Lent meant 40 days, stretched to 46 by counting Sundays differently. Ember days and vigils dotted the map. Meat went away, so did dairy and eggs in many places. 1 meal a day on the strict days moved later, then later still, until evening prayers gave you permission to stop pretending you weren't starving. Exemptions existed. Children, elders, the sick, beggars, pilgrims. Everyone else obeyed publicly and improvised privately, which is a polite way to say people did what they had to do in a world that forgave hunger less than it forgave sin.